After the car accident, Eleanor and Eleanor's mother were critically ill and needed expensive surgery. Boyfriend abandoned us upon hearing the news and went on to marry someone else. Only her childhood friend, David Davies, didn't hesitate to sell company shares, taking out $7 million for our treatment. Although Eleanor's mother ultimately passed away despite rescue efforts, Eleanor lost her sight due to the surgery. But David Davies still stayed by my side, not only helping Eleanor with Eleanor's mother's funeral arrangements but also giving Eleanor a grand wedding. After marriage, we husband and wife were loving, a harmonious couple. The couple everyone envied in their circle. Unexpectedly, after that party/banquet, his friend asked him, "David, what if one day Eleanor finds out that you gave her cornea to Jessica, and that to save Aunt Catherine, you killed her mother?" David Davies muttered to himself, "I wronged her, so I will spend a lifetime repaying her. But I love Jessica, and for her, I am willing to sink into sin forever, unforgiven through 3 lives, I am willing." 1. Eleanor, are you really sure? After undergoing cryogenic suspension, Eleanor will cease to exist in this world. Listening to Professor Adams's regretful voice on the phone call, Eleanor nodded. Eleanor just asked Professor Adams one last favor. Please help Eleanor investigate the truth about Eleanor's mother's death. Eleanor wants to know who killed her. Outside the door, David Davies's regretful voice happened to sound, "Although Jessica doesn't love me, I helped save Aunt Catherine and also helped her regain her sight. I have no regrets anymore. As for Eleanor and Eleanor's mother, I have repaid them with the rest of my life, and that's enough." Eleanor's fingers tightened around the phone. Eleanor's eyes, Eleanor's mother's life, in his mouth, was just as simple. That's enough? Even now, every word he said was still about Jessica, not a single moment about Elia. Nor. It was his good friend Andrew who couldn't bear it and said, "Is it worth it to harm mother and daughter like this for a woman who doesn't love you?" David Davies replied without hesitation, "Of course it's worth it. As long as Jessica is happy, I'm willing to do anything. Even if it means I have to die." Andrew sighed, "But you didn't die, it was Eleanor's mother who died." Andrew hesitated, then fell silent. David Davies was silent for a moment, picked up his wine glass, and drank it in one gulp, seemingly unwilling to offer any explanation. Hearing their footsteps approaching, Eleanor panicked and fled back to Eleanor's room. Eleanor stumbled, causing Eleanor to collapse powerlessly onto the floor. Yes, Eleanor was a blind person. Eleanor couldn't see this world, nor people's true intentions. But Eleanor never imagined that the person who caused Eleanor's misfortune was actually Eleanor's beloved spouse/partner. And Eleanor's most respected and loved Eleanor's mother also died in the scheme/plot he orchestrated for Jessica. Eleanor was foolish enough to think he was like a savior/hero, saving our mother and daughter's lives. Eleanor even took his paltry handout/pitiful charity and flaunted Eleanor's happiness everywhere. It was truly absurd. The sound of the door closing sounded. After Andrew left, David Davies went upstairs and called Eleanor's name a few times, but Eleanor didn't answer. He immediately felt something was wrong, hurried up, saw me lying on the floor, and helped Eleanor up with concern. "What happened?" "Eleanor, you fell. Why didn't you call me?" Eleanor could see his concern at that moment was real. Eleanor also clearly understood that it was all just out of pity/compassion for Eleanor. "It's nothing, Eleanor just accidentally fell." Eleanor replied perfunctory/casual, shaking him off and standing up herself. Anyway, Eleanor couldn't see, and this kind of thing wasn't the first time. David Davies became even more distressed. "You can't see already, you need to be even more careful. From now on, I'll have someone follow you everywhere. If anything else happens, I will really feel heartbroken." After speaking, he gently pulled Eleanor into his embrace. His movements were as loving and gentle as before, but Eleanor could no longer feel his warmth. A person, for the sake of another person, could really go to this extent, sacrificing his own happiness for her, and also sacrificing the happiness of others, even the lives of others. Eleanor closed Eleanor's eyes, and tears slid down uncontrollably. At night, after David Davies fell asleep, Eleanor was wide awake. Eleanor carefully took Eleanor's white cane and went to the side room/guest room, finding a box. The box's location was placed there by David Davies himself, for Eleanor's convenience in retrieving it. Inside were all the gifts/presents he had given Eleanor over the years. Since Eleanor was leaving, there was no need to keep these gifts/presents. Eleanor might as well donated them, giving them to people who needed them more. Eleanor fumbled to take down the box, when suddenly a voice sounded behind Eleanor. "Eleanor, what are you doing?" Eleanor was startled, carefully protecting these precious gifts/presents so they wouldn't fall onto the floor. David Davies rushed over, snatched the box from Eleanor, and said, "Aren't these the gifts/presents I gave you? What are you doing with them?" His tone was actually a little nervous/anxious. How ironic. Eleanor ignored him and left without looking back. Eleanor didn't even leave him an explanation. The next morning, Eleanor took the gifts/presents to the charity foundation. Eleanor wanted to donate them to help more blind people like Eleanor regain their sight. However, the staff member seemed very hesitant. Eleanor smiled and said, "It's okay, Mr. Davies won't blame you. Just donate them." But the staff member said, "No, Mrs. Davies, it's just that all of these things are promotional items/freebies, they are not valuable." Hearing the words from the staff member, Eleanor felt ice cold. How could that be? These were the gifts/presents David Davies bought Eleanor over and over again for the past 7 years. Every single one was very valuable. Yesterday, he was still very nervous/anxious about these treasures/valuable items yesterday. It turned out it was because of this. The reason he was nervous/anxious was because he was afraid Eleanor would discover the truth about the gifts. He wanted to hide it from Eleanor forever. Eleanor suppressed Eleanor's emotions and asked the staff member, "So, where are the original pieces that these promotional items/freebies belong to?" The staff member thought for a moment, then said even more apologetically, "These are all unique custom-made pieces, given by Mr. Davies on behalf of the company/firm to Miss Jessica." Hearing that name, Eleanor's mind went blank. It turned out that for the past 7 years, he had been giving gifts/presents to Jessica. He signed a contract with Jessica to be the company/firm spokesperson/brand ambassador. He even sent all the jewelry from the auction to Jessica in the company/firm's name, saying it was a token of appreciation for the partnership. A man's hidden love, both overt and subtle, hidden in every detail. It pierced Eleanor's heart, causing Eleanor felt a pang in Eleanor's heart. Eleanor laughed self-deprecatingly and didn't ask any further questions. Because, now, there were only 5 days left until Eleanor was to undergo the cryogenic suspension. 5 days, to say goodbye to 7 years, was enough. 2. For the smooth progress of the cryogenic suspension, Eleanor followed Professor Adams's request and cancelled all Eleanor's identification/erased Eleanor's identity. Professor Adams sent Eleanor some information about Eleanor's mother's death that year. Eleanor's name was indeed signed on Eleanor's mother's organ donation purse. Except, it was forged by David Davies. It turned out that back then, he kept saying he loved Eleanor, and even practiced his handwriting to be exactly like Eleanor's. It was all just to set up this trap. Eleanor gritted Eleanor's teeth. Upon returning home/house, David Davies was uncharacteristically not at work. He saw Eleanor returning from outside, with a hint of nervous/anxious in his confusion. "Eleanor, where did you go? The jewelry I gave you seems to be gone?" Seeing his hypocritical behavior, Eleanor suddenly laughed. Eleanor gave them away. Eleanor originally planned to give them to the charity foundation, but they said these jewelry were worthless. So, Eleanor gave them to the recycling collector/junk dealer. Eleanor's words made David Davies even more nervous/anxious. He stammered, "Those people at the charity foundation don't understand the value of these custom jewelry at all. They were talking nonsense. Don't be angry. I'll have someone track down the jewelry right away." The anxious, earnest way he spoke made Eleanor feel even more disgusted. "It's fine, no need. You can just give Eleanor new jewelry in the future." Hearing Eleanor's words, David Davies sighed in relief and pulled Eleanor into his embrace. "That's right, our Eleanor is the kindest, she likes to help the poor. Let's just consider it charity. Your husband will get you some more precious jewelry tomorrow." He said it with certainty. But Eleanor suddenly remembered, tomorrow seemed to be Jessica's birthday. No wonder Eleanor would also receive gifts/presents tomorrow. It turned out Jessica's gifts/presents would have promotional items/freebies again. Eleanor didn't say anything, just silently sat beside the dining table to prepare for lunch. The lunch on the dining table tasted very familiar. It was from Eleanor's favorite hotel/restaurant. David Davies arranged for this hotel/restaurant to provide Eleanor's lunch day after day for 7 years. Einar used to think this was his love for Eleanor. Now, it seemed like perfunctory/casual. Just when he approached Eleanor, Eleanor distinctly smelled the smell of cooking/home cooking on him. And who was he cooking for? To prevent Eleanor from disturbing Jessica, he really went to great lengths. Eleanor poured the food into the trash can and turned to leave. It was time for this 7-year hoax/deception to end. Just cancelled all Eleanor's identification/erased Eleanor's identity, and leaving wasn't enough. Eleanor also wanted to divorce him. Eleanor didn't want to have any more ties with this person, in any aspect. After leaving the law firm, Eleanor took the agreement/document to David Davies' company/firm. Just as Eleanor entered, Eleanor heard a chaotic commotion/noise. Miss Jessica is so beautiful, she's a perfect match for our Mr. Davies. Could she be the rumored Mrs. Davies? No wonder Mr. Davies always keeps her hidden. Definitely. The bag and jewelry she was wearing combined are worth tens of millions. It's all from our Mr. Davies. Before Eleanor could finish listening, David Davies' assistant came over and took Eleanor away. In the penthouse office, Eleanor heard a familiar voice coming from inside. "How is Mark treating you? Are you doing well?" David Davies asked cautiously, as if afraid she wasn't doing well, and also afraid she was doing well. Jessica's tone was calm with a hint of sweetness. "Very well. Just a few days ago, he even started a jewelry brand for me, saying it was a surprise. It's been 7 years, and he's still like a child." And the man who cherished her like a child, in her words, was precisely the boyfriend who abandoned Eleanor during the car accident. At this moment, Eleanor suddenly felt a sense of desolation. It turned out every man Eleanor had loved Jessica. And Eleanor was always the one not worth loving. My fingernails dug into my palms, mirroring the raw, bleeding mess in my heart. Stunned, The assistant suddenly received a phone call and was in a hurry to find David Davies to sign something, opening the door in front of Eleanor. David Davies looked at Eleanor, a hint of surprise in his eyes flashed. "Eleanor? Why are you here?" He wanted to stand up and walk towards Eleanor, but then he looked at Jessica sitting on the sofa. Jessica smiled, stood up and said to Eleanor, "Eleanor, long time no see. You're still so beautiful." But her words were sarcastic. Eleanor's clothes were old, and Eleanor's appearance had changed greatly after losing my sight. However, Jessica's scent was pleasant, quiet, and elegant. Although Eleanor couldn't see, Eleanor could already imagine how stunning she looked now. Eleanor clenched Eleanor's fists. 7 years, Eleanor, who was originally the campus beauty, had become a blind, worn-out wife. Now Eleanor could no longer compare to her. "David Davies, this is the result you wanted, isn't it? Eleanor is no longer a threat to the one you love." Eleanor pulled Eleanor's thoughts back and ignored Jessica's provocation, just calmly spoke. "David, Eleanor also has 2 documents here for you to sign." Saying this, Eleanor slipped the folder into the pile of contracts the secretary/assistant had brought. David Davies signed it without even looking and handed it back to Eleanor. He seemed anxious for Eleanor to leave, afraid Eleanor would interrupt him and Jessica reminiscing. Eleanor smiled. "Since there's nothing else, Eleanor will leave first. You two continue chatting." But for some reason, David Davies suddenly hesitated. He left Jessica and came out to stop Eleanor, saying, "Eleanor, Jessica is the company/firm spokesperson/brand ambassador. She's here for work." This baseless explanation made Eleanor feel incredibly ridiculous. "Eleanor knows. You go ahead and be busy with work. Eleanor will wait for you home/house." After Eleanor finished speaking, he finally sighed in relief and had the assistant escort Eleanor downstairs. Following the assistant to the parking garage, Eleanor was just about to get into the car. Someone rushed out from behind at some point and pushed Eleanor onto the floor. "Eleanor, are you really blind?" Eleanor never thought David could be so cruel for me, going to this extent. Jessica's voice began to differ from her gentle tone just now. She laughed wildly, like a demon from hell. Hearing the words from her mouth, Eleanor's eyes widened instantly. What do you mean? What do you mean David Davies did it for you? Before Eleanor could finish asking, Jessica laughed and suddenly stepped on Eleanor's palm/hand with her high heel. You still don't know, do you? The car accident involving you and Eleanor's mother 7 years ago. David Davies did it. He felt sorry for me, couldn't bear to see me cry, so he found you, this unlucky person. You are truly unlucky, sleeping beside your enemy for 7 years. Jessica's words were bone-chilling. Eleanor was momentarily stunned. Eleanor already knew the fact that David Davies had stolen organs behind Eleanor's back. But how could Eleanor have imagined that the car accident 7 years ago was also related to him? The stinging pain in Eleanor's heart far surpassed the physical pain, causing a surge of furious strength to erupt within Eleanor instantly. Eleanor got up and gave her a slap with Eleanor's white cane. But Eleanor was a blind person after all. Eleanor couldn't see clearly, and the force was light force. But somehow, Jessica suddenly fell backward, hitting the pillar/column with a loud thud. Jessica! Before Eleanor could react, David Davies had already rushed over to us and pushed Eleanor away. Eleanor's white cane dropped from Eleanor's hand. As Eleanor was frantically crawling on the floor searching for it, the person who was only focused on rushing towards Jessica forcefully rolled over Eleanor's hand. Jessica had just tormented Eleanor's palm/hand, and now being run over by the man, Einer's hand felt like it was broken completely. Eleanor screamed in pain, but the David Davies who used to care so much for Eleanor couldn't see even a hint of Eleanor's pain, only focusing on scolding Eleanor. Eleanor, are you crazy? Jessica was just concerned about your eyes. How could you lay a hand on her? Eleanor curled Eleanor's lips into a cold smile. Why can't Eleanor lay a hand on her? David Davies, were Eleanor's mother's death and Eleanor's eyes not related to her back then? Eleanor yelled, covering Eleanor's broken hand. David Davies suddenly froze, then quickly explained to Eleanor, Eleanor, what nonsense are you talking? What does anything about you and Eleanor's mother have to do with Jessica? I think you've gone completely insane. Spouting nonsense here. Apologize to Jessica right now. I won't pursue this matter further. Before Eleanor could speak, Jessica had already spoken first, weakly and feebly. It's not Eleanor's fault, it's mine. Mark broke off his engagement to her and married me back then, so she must harbor resentment. Eleanor knows you hate Eleanor. But David is truly devoted to you, you shouldn't blame him. Her hypocritical behavior made Eleanor sick, while David Davies only cared about comforting her injuries. Jessica, stop talking. Let's ignore her, I'll take you to the hospital first. Now, who was the one truly in love? Eleanor smiled bitterly. 7 years of love finally turned to ashes at this moment. Eleanor and David Davies were completely over. After being taken to the hospital by a kind person, Eleanor received an apology text message from David Davies. Jessica is the company/firm spokesperson/brand ambassador after all. You hurt her, which is bad for the company/firm. Making you apologize today was just a temporary measure, a performance for her to see. Don't overthink it. How about I come back tonight to apologize to you after I deal with this? Don't be unhappy, wife. Now, W. Whether he was acting or it was genuine affection, it had nothing to do with Eleanor anymore. Eleanor just wanted to leave here, leave him. Eleanor took the signed divorce agreement and placed it in the most obvious spot in the home/house. And the next morning, the car to pick Eleanor up for the laboratory had arrived, but the person who said he would come home/house to apologize never showed up. Eleanor smiled. This home/house Eleanor had never truly seen clearly, this person Eleanor had never truly understood, had completely ceased to matter to Eleanor. Upon arriving at the laboratory, Professor Adams said with great regret, Eleanor, the results of the investigation you asked me to conduct are in. Eleanor's mother's death. Professor Adams couldn't bear to say more and played the private investigator's investigation video/footage for Eleanor. Besides the forged signature, the car accident involving Miss Eleanor and her mother 7 years ago was also deliberate. The driver of the speeding car that came from the right lane at that time was David Davies. David Davies, it was really him. The three words that once stirred Eleanor's heartstrings were now slowly merging with Eleanor's blood and tears. 7 years Eleanor had deeply loved him and been grateful to him. It turned out to be a joke from beginning to end. Eleanor's final request to Professor Adams was, please send this investigation video/footage to the largest media outlet in the city. Eleanor wants everyone to see this person's true face. 5 After spending a night at the hospital with Jessica, David Davies finally remembered he had said he would go home/house to accompany Eleanor. He rubbed his tired eyes and suddenly felt a strange pang in his heart. The secretary/assistant beside him looked troubled at the mountain of complaint letters. Mr. Davies, should we really continue using Miss Jessica as our spokesperson/brand ambassador? Miss Jessica has too many scanned ALS. Ever since she became the company/firm spokesperson/brand ambassador, the company/firm's stock price has plummeted, and the shareholders are already complaining. Perhaps you should consider it carefully? David Davies rejected him without thinking. No need to consider. My company/firm spokesperson/brand ambassador can only be Jessica. This is what I owe her. Back then, when she was blind, I couldn't find a corneal transplant for her in time. I failed her, and now. However, halfway through his sentence, for some reason, Eleanor's figure appeared in his mind. Jessica was only blind for a year. And Eleanor had been blind for a full 7 years. How much more painful must that be? The feeling in David Davies's heart grew increasingly wrong. He called Eleanor several times, but Eleanor didn't answer. Just as he was about to leave the hospital and go home/house to see Eleanor, a delivery person suddenly arrived and hurriedly handed a file bag to David Davies. Mr. Davies, your urgent delivery. David Davies froze for a moment. Who sent it? The delivery person looked at the sender's name. The sender is called Eleanor. Hearing Eleanor's name, David Davies frantically tore open the file bag. Inside was an investigation report/findings. The contents were all about the truth of Eleanor's mother's death and that car accident. He panicked a little. He wanted to call Eleanor, to coax and deceive Eleanor like before. But before the phone call could connect, more information came through on his phone. The fact that he caused that car accident and killed Eleanor's mother had spread online/went viral. It had already reached the top of the trending list. He looked at his phone in disbelief. His teeth were almost grinding to powder. Eleanor. He got into the car like a madman, running several red lights, driving towards the home/house. All the way, he was thinking with resentment. Eleanor wants to ruin him. Eleanor wants to completely crush him. Because the information he received was all media outlets exposing his scandal/shameful deeds. Eleanor, get out! He kicked open the front door/house door, roaring, while searching for Eleanor's figure. It was only then he discovered that Eleanor's belongings in the home/house were completely gone. Eleanor, don't think you can hide from me and I won't find you. You're a blind person, let's see where you can hide. He frantically called Eleanor. Unfortunately, only Eleanor's phone was off. Message came through on the phone call. He called the assistant again, telling him to find Eleanor no matter what. Mr. Davies, isn't the priority now to deal with the online rumors/smear campaign about you? The assistant asked David Davies somewhat hesitantly. Several media outlets had already flooded into the company headquarters. They were bound to demand an explanation from David Davies. But David Davies himself was going to spend manpower and time searching for his wife. Moreover, if the information exposed online was true, David Davies would likely go to prison. His anger about settling the score with Eleanor subsided slightly. He took 2 deep breaths and said, tell the company/firm's legal department and PR department, no matter what method they use. They must settle the online rumors/smear campaign. He had been completely consumed by anger just now, making him unable to think calmly. Now that he thought about it, Eleanor was able to expose his deeds online. Eleanor must have known everything he had done. Recalling where Eleanor might have gone these past few years, he then hurriedly left the house again. Just as he reached the door, Jessica actually showed up. In fact, after David Davies left the hospital in a disturbed state, she had been following behind him. She had also seen the huge uproar online, fearing that this matter would ultimately involve her. So she had followed David Davies all the way. David, is Eleanor crazy? Why is she slandering you? Doesn't she know that talking nonsense online will ruin you? She pretended to be innocent, as if she knew nothing. But only she knew best. It was her who instigated David Davies to harm Eleanor and Eleanor's mother in the first place. David Davies's anger had just subsided a bit. Now, he just wanted to find Eleanor and ask for clarification. But Jessica's words were like pouring a full bucket of oil onto his nearly extinguished anger. He slowly clenched his fists. His mind was filled with Jessica's last sentence. Eleanor wants to ruin him. Eleanor is talking nonsense online just to ruin him. Seeing David Davies's anger ignited again, she hid the triumph in her eyes and said tearfully, David, is it because you're good to me that Eleanor is jealous? But we're just ordinary friends. She's really too petty/small-minded. And she shouldn't try to ruin you just because she's jealous. Every word Jessica said seemed to be reminding him. It was because Eleanor knew about him and Jessica. Eleanor was getting revenge on him. He stormed out of the door in anger, no matter how Jessica called out. He had to find Eleanor, to ask Eleanor for a reasonable explanation. David Davies searched almost everywhere Eleanor might possibly be. He even found Eleanor's mother's cemetery/graveyard. He also took photos, trying to send Eleanor messages to threaten Eleanor. Eleanor, if you don't appear before me within an hour, I will personally destroy your mother's cemetery/graveyard. In total, during this hour, he sent Eleanor countless messages. But they all fell on deaf ears. Eleanor received no response. And at this moment, Eleanor was already standing before the laboratory for cryogenic suspension, waiting for the arrival of death. Miss Eleanor, I must confirm with you again. You are still so young, you can definitely find a matching cornea. But once the cryogenic suspension fails, it means you will lose your life. Professor Adams's voice carried a hint of tremor. He did need a test subject/specimen to break through the final hurdle of the experiment. But his conscience wouldn't allow him to do anything that crossed the line. Usually, people who chose this experiment were dying individuals suffering from terminal illness. They hoped to keep themselves in this world through low-temperature preservation/cryopreservation, waiting for more advanced technology to emerge, so they could extend their life after being revived/resuscitated. But to undergo cryogenic suspension just for a pair of eyes, Professor Adams had never encountered this before. Eleanor shook Eleanor's head. Eleanor really wanted to cry, but Eleanor's tears seemed to have dried up, unable to show any more emotion. Professor Adams, every day without Eleanor's eyes is a kind of pain for Eleanor. Regardless of whether the experiment succeeds or not, please announce to the outside world that Eleanor is dead. Eleanor could no longer find any reason to continue living in this world. Innocent Eleanor's mother, who could have enjoyed her later years happily and peacefully, only because of David Davies, assuming typo for the man Eleanor had loved for 7 years, was deprived of her precious life, just to make his first love/idealized love happy. And Eleanor was merely Jessica's organ donor. The root of all these nightmares was simply because Eleanor knew David Davies. How ridiculous. Grew up together with him. Not only did he disregard our long-standing friendship, but he personally pushed Eleanor and Eleanor's mother into the abyss. He was a devil who controlled all evil. He wore the guise of Lucifer, showing a peaceful and harmless smile, but in the flicker of his eyes, there was only calculation. The person Eleanor lingered for in this world was no longer here. Eleanor staying alone would only add to the sorrow. Eleanor signed the final liability waiver. Eleanor walked into the laboratory for cryogenic suspension. That Aner, whose life and feelings were as humble as an ant's, was dead. That foolish Eleanor, who fell in love with the murderer of Eleanor's mother, was dead. David Davies, are you satisfied now? At the same time, David Davies, who was driving aimlessly on the road, searching for Eleanor, felt a sudden spasm in his chest. He quickly braked and stopped by the roadside, pressing his hand tightly against his chest, breathing heavily. It must be Eleanor who's making me so angry. This ungrateful woman. I compensated her year after year for 7 years. Not only did she not understand gratitude, she even wants to harm me. He regretted it immensely now. He shouldn't have been so good to Eleanor. Just returning her mother's organs to Jessica's mother. Just replacing her cornea with Jessica's. That's all. Yes, he seemed to have forgotten. For Jessica's sake, he not only caused Eleanor to be blind for 7 years, he also took Eleanor's mother's life. He was blinded by sudden anger, losing his mind. He spread open his trembling hands and kept looking at them, as if he saw the fresh blood of Eleanor's innocent mother and Eleanor's long-dried tears on them. 7. He lit a cigarette, forcing himself to calm down. David Davies tried to use deep breaths to slow down his nervous/anxious emotions. The phone call rang. He saw Jessica's name. A strange irritation rose in his heart. David, have you seen what's trending online? I've been doxxed by netizens and the media outlets. Now everyone is cursing me. Now Mark is going to divorce me. Seeing that David Davies on the other end of the phone call didn't answer, she immediately spoke in a soft, coaxing tone. I'm your company/firm spokesperson/brand ambassador. Being cursed by people will only affect your company/firm's reputation. I'm also doing this for your own good. I don't want Eleanor to use public opinion/the public to ruin you. When Eleanor's name was mentioned, David Davies's heart felt as if a th. Orne had been deeply embedded in it. He seemed to have been directing his resentment at the wrong person all along. What was Eleanor's fault? Eleanor was just seeking justice for Eleanor's mother and Eleanor herself. But what about Jessica? Such obvious provocation, it was clearly intended to make him push all the blame onto Eleanor. The truly wrong people were him and Jessica. And Eleanor was just the final victim of his ignorance and foolishness. He finally saw clearly, but it was too late. And yet, Jessica's provocations in the past had always worked on him. Blind love makes people unable to distinguish right from wrong. Moreover, it was just his one-sided effort. Jessica called him in a fit of rage. It was just because she was being cursed by people, and her husband Mark was going to divorce her. David, are you listening to me? Hurry up and help me fix this. Have your company/firm's legal department send Eleanor a cease and desist letter/lawyer's letter. Just say that she is maliciously spreading rumors and slandering, and you are going to sue/file a lawsuit against her. At this point, she was still thinking of twisting right and wrong. David Davies laughed ironically. After all these years, he had actually turned himself into a complete scoundrel for such a woman. The evidence is all posted online. How do you expect me to send a cease and desist letter/lawyer's letter? He retorted. He wanted to laugh. Laugh at how foolish he had been. Only the evidence related to you is posted. You can apologize online and say that everything was mutual consent between you and Eleanor. After all, you are husband and wife/married. It turned out Jessica also knew that Eleanor and David Davies were husband and wife/married. But David Davies himself had probably forgotten. His real wife was someone named Eleanor. But what had he been doing for the past 7 years? He had been using the pretense of loving Eleanor, while wholeheartedly loving another woman. And I won't hurt Eleanor anymore. When I find her, you can give her cornea back to her. You have already used her eyes to see this world for 7 years, that's enough. This was the only way David Davies could think of to compensate Eleanor. As for Eleanor's mother's part, would he truly do as he claimed to the outside world? Using the love of the rest of his life, not just for show, but genuinely, treating Eleanor as his real wife. To make up for it, to cherish Eleanor. As for Jessica, he would never have anything to do with her again. A woman who didn't love him and only wanted to use him, didn't deserve his love, and certainly didn't deserve his wife's eyes. 8. David Davies seemed to have found a goal. He started the car again, wanting to find Eleanor more and more frantically. He drove past every place they had been together. He could always recall the little moments he shared with Eleanor, and their childhood. Went to elementary school together, went to middle school together. To get into the same high school as Eleanor, he could have gotten into a better school, but he still applied to the same one as Eleanor. Eleanor and he both thought that in the future, Eleanor and he would naturally end up together. Get married, have children. But in college/university, he met Jessica, and Eleanor met Mark. Eleanor and he could never go back to the past. David Davies searched for Eleanor for a full 3 days. For these 3 days, he stayed in the car. When he was tired, he would sleep in the car for a while, and when he woke up, he would drive around searching. He hoped to find Eleanor's trace on a street corner that no one paid attention to. But these 3 days were all in vain. Exhausted, he returned home/house. Sitting on the sofa with his eyes lowered, he finally saw the coffee table in front of the sofa. A divorce agreement Eleanor had already signed was placed on it. It was only then that he realized Eleanor truly wanted to leave him completely. He's 7 years he had been married to Eleanor. He had never imagined that Eleanor would leave his side. Mr. Davies, please accept my condolences. Regarding your wife's funeral arrangements, would you like to proceed? He hadn't yet recovered from the shock of the divorce agreement. The assistant's phone call almost caught him off guard. Condolences? Funeral arrangements? What do you mean? The assistant hesitated for a moment. Still, he said, didn't you see the news today? Your wife passed away and donated her body to the laboratory. The news struck him like lightning. Without even hanging up the phone call, he frantically searched for the news. The striking headline stimulated his eyes. Confirmed, David Davies' wife, who has been the subject of controversy, committed suicide 3 days ago. According to reports, David Davies' wife voluntarily donated her body to the laboratory. He couldn't believe his eyes. After he had truly recognized his mistakes, the wife he owed the most, the one he wanted to spend the rest of his life making up to, not only wanted to cut off all ties with him, she didn't even give him a chance to make amends. Eleanor, how cruel you are. Did you know I regretted it and chose this way to punish me? Eleanor, didn't you love me? How could you bear to leave me alone? He ran out of the front door/house door like a madman. He was going to that damned laboratory to snatch Eleanor's body/remains back. He shouted, he struggled, letting himself smash the laboratory's gate to pieces. But he still couldn't see the wife he longed for. He sat by the roadside in despair, tears streaming down. After some time, a person walked up to him. Mr. Davies, Miss Eleanor asked me to deliver a message to you before her passing. Professor Adams stood before David Davies. Looking at the man who had completely broken down, there was not a hint of sympathy in his eyes. He knew everything about Eleanor and David Davies. He also knew this man was completely unworthy of Eleanor giving up her life for. But this last wish, as it were, had to be told to David Davies. Mr. Davies, Miss Eleanor asked me to convey to you, without fail. You must sign that divorce agreement. Whether alive or dead, she doesn't want to have anything to do with the murderer of her mother ever again. The murderer of her mother. It was indeed him. Thinking from another perspective, if his mother was killed by the person he loved most, would he forgive that person? He slapped himself several times. He knelt before Professor Adams, weeping and begging bitterly, Can you give Eleanor back to me? She is my wife, even in death. I want to be buried with her. Professor Adams was not moved. He just coldly stepped back. Mr. Davies, did you not hear what I just said clearly? Miss Eleanor, even in death, does not want to have any relationship with you anymore, let alone being buried with you. You should hurry back and sign the divorce agreement. After speaking, Professor Adams left without looking back. No matter how David Davies begged, he didn't turn around. He didn't know how he got back home/house. He just sat holding the divorce agreement all night long. As the first ray of sunlight shone in the morning, he finally picked up the pen and signed his name on the divorce agreement. Eleanor, when you were alive, I wronged you. Now that you have left me, I will fulfill your last wish. 9. He didn't know how long had passed. The main door was pushed open. In a daze, he thought the person he most wanted to see had returned. The corner of his mouth, which had just lifted, fell instantly when he saw the person who entered. Jessica was also covered in dirt and looked disheveled. After being doxxed by netizens, she didn't even dare to go home/house. Mark officially divorced her. She left with nothing, after divorce, and had nowhere to go. David, I only have you now. It's perfect, Eleanor is dead, we can be together. NLY. Jessica had lost everything. She could only cling to David Davies. Even in her eyes, David Davies had always been just a desperate admirer who wagged his tail and begged for pity. Eleanor was dead. Her casual remark was the disappearance of a vibrant life. But she showed no remorse, even thinking it was better that Eleanor was dead, which was exactly what she wanted. David Davies raised his head, his crimson eyes staring intently at her. Jessica, do you have any humanity left? I must have been blind to listen to your every word. If it weren't for you, my Eleanor wouldn't have died. Give me back everything you stole from her. Before he could finish speaking, David Davies lunged at her. Heart-wrenching screaming immediately erupted from the house. At the same time, several officers/police officers in uniform rushed into the house. Almost instantly, they pinned the now frantic David Davies to the ground. The smell of blood filled the surroundings. Jessica's screams and David Davies's insane laughter also echoed in the room above. And in his hand, he was clutching 2 eyeballs he had just gouged out. Sitting in the interrogation room, David Davies confessed to aggravated assault/intentional harm against Jessica without denial. Not only that, he admitted to all the charges, being incited by others, plotting to kill Eleanor's mother, and illegal human organ transplantation. He did this only to atone for his sins. He couldn't use the rest of his life to make up for his wrongs against Eleanor, but he would spend the rest of his life repentance endlessly while receiving legal punishment. As for Jessica, even after having her eyes gouged out, she was charged by the police after receiving treatment. The charges were inciting others to murder/conspiracy to murder and illegal human organ transplantation. She couldn't accept her tragic ending and died in despair. David Davies spent a long life in the cold prison. He was always repentance, atoning for his sins. Not to erase his guilt, but only to punish himself. He didn't know how many years had passed. He noticed his newly grown hair was already white-haired/gray-haired. Just then, the prison door was opened. A prison guard walked in. David Davies, someone is here to see you. How many years had it been since anyone came to see him? Those who once cared about him had long since left. He couldn't imagine who else would come to see him. The iron chains shackled to his feet made a harsh sound with every step he took. In the prison visiting room, Eleanor sat in a chair wearing a brightly colored dress. Upon seeing David Davies being escorted in, Eleanor's lips curled into a mocking smile. Their eyes met. He recognized the person he had longed for in his heart for decades at first glance. But Eleanor at this moment was so young and beautiful. Eleanor's appearance hadn't changed at all, making him feel like he was back in those past days in a trance. David Davies, do you still recognize me? Eleanor came to see you just to tell you that Eleanor didn't die. And while Eleanor was here, Eleanor wanted to see how miserable you look spending your days alone in prison. This was in stark contrast to Eleanor's triumphant laughter. He went from shock to madness, then to relief. Finally, after spitting out a large mouthful of blood, Eleanor watched him collapse in front of Eleanor. Shortly after, news of David Davies' death came from the prison. And after Eleanor was revived/resuscitated from cryogenic suspension, Eleanor started a brilliant life anew. End of story.